welcome to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. It's just panelists today. I'm here, Nell Harrington. I am an engineer at Mozilla. And with me are my two co-hosts, Scott. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's a little bit rainy here in Central Oregon, which is not a place that it normally rains. That's usually what we call in the valley. So.
In the valley. That makes me think of Southern California.
Yeah, the Willamette Valley.
Awesome. And Tyler, how are you? How are things in Utah?
They're going well. It's getting warmer, and so we're definitely liking that. And my wife and I are actually building a house, and that's almost done. It's great that we're able to get it finished, even in a kind of COVID times we live in. Utah's not as shut down as some of the other states, so people are still allowed to build houses, thank goodness, and finish off the work that we're doing. So we're actually one of the lower states as far as numbers and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we stay that way.
Yeah.
Hope so too. The same cannot be said about Washington.
Got hit early.
Yeah, I have a colleague in Michigan, which is also heavily hit. So yeah, thoughts and prayers go out to all our listeners who are still kind of going through this, and we'll make it out together, but we're all in this together. So,
of course.
This episode is sponsored by Gravitational. As your team and cloud infrastructure grows, you may want to reevaluate how you access SSH servers and Kubernetes clusters. Gravitational Teleport is an emerging open source replacement for OpenSSH, which was built for modern cloud workflows. Teleport is opinionated. It does not allow SSH keys, and instead it insists on certificate-based authentication, making it dead easy to set up and use. Teleport is fully compatible with your SSH and Kubernetes tooling, comes with a beautiful web UI and an audit log, and it allows users to access servers outside of data centers like IoT devices. It was called Teleport because it creates the illusion that all your company's servers are in the same room with you, even if some of them are self-driving vehicles. Download Teleport on gravitational.com/teleport or find it on github.com/gravitational/teleport.
All right. Well, it's just panelists today, and Scott has a cool project he wants us to talk about. Scott, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So for my day job at Stelligent, we are primarily focused on AWS. And so that means we are heavy AWS tool users. And so I kind of want this episode, infrastructure as code. And on AWS, the primary infrastructure as code tool is CloudFormation. When kind of AWS was launched, actually Bezos, his whole approach was like, at one point, there's actually some famous letter that circulates around out there about how he wanted everybody who was building services, whether it was like selling books or whatever, they needed to build a service endpoint that everybody could then, consume to interact with, right? And so that's kind of how we got started with AWS. And so when they released, the first versions of like S3 and those types of things, it was only available through like an API, right? And so for a long time, you basically, if you wanted to like spin up infrastructure, a lot of like maybe you could like say launch an EC2 instance in the console, but maybe certain things you could only do through code. And so they've always made development kind of AWS, and while you can do all of this infrastructure as code with those SDKs, they're going to be very, it's building software. It's a big project, right? So you need to, it's just more involved, right? And so the idea with CloudFormation is a YAML file, right? And so you can specify things like a VPC and subnets and, internet gateways and firewalls and all those fun things. And then you put those things within, you put your EC2 instances within those VPCs and then within those subnets and all those things, right? And one of the things is that CloudFormation gets really like to build out like a subnet with like say two public subnets to build a VPC with two public subnets and two private subnets, attaching, network and then you could literally spend like an hour or more just building that one thing, right? And so while CloudFormation does like this amazing thing and gives you this really templated approach, and you can use variables throughout so that this thing is reusable. So you can use it in your environment, or you could go into like a whole new AWS environment in another availability zone, and it's going to pick all of those variables up and do it. But one of the things is like to do automation on the CloudFormation, you need to write like a batch script or a shell script, or like a Python script to actually connect to AWS and upload it, and then the whole process would run. And you would even need to write something like they did add to like the AWS CLI, where it would write little like command line things that it would actually ping CloudFormation as it's deploying this infrastructure, and it's like waiting and giving you updates. And so like every part of even the CloudFormation process was still had a lot of manual kind of management of it. And so kind of the primary thing I wanted to talk about today was AWS CDK, which means Cloud Development Kit. And it's basically a software kit that's built specifically to kind of sit on top of these same classes in CloudFormation, because it's actually so you write basically software in the 4 supported languages: Python, C#, JavaScript, TypeScript also, and what is the C#, Java, Python, JavaScript, TypeScript. Those are the 4 support languages, right? And so what it allows you to do is just create. They build these constructs that are really simple. And so you literally can have like a 1-line construct that builds that VPC. And that default VPC is like something like 300 lines of CloudFormation template. That would take hours for you to create. Now, obviously, it's very opinionated, which to some is a big downside. But for others, it saves you a lot of time. And it's really good for prototyping. And so it just allows a lot of really rapid development. And so one of the things I wanted to kind of go back to is one of the things. So what they did when they kind of built CDK is they built something called, let me get it up. It's actually called JSII. And this is actually kind of where it's a tool with a bunch of JavaScript classes that is kind of the foundation of CDK. And then from this tool, it will generate all these other all this other language support, right? And so that's kind of one of the foundations of this development kit. And you actually can use it, believe it or not, you could use this to build your own, multi-language, software development kit if you wanted. So I think that's kind of neat. But with CDK, what they did first was they would go in and create their constructs that were based around these AWS like the CloudFormation like objects. So like, let me just pull up the documentation on this. So
I'm taking a look at the website right now. So what I'm noticing is it compiles what you write in your language in CDK into a CloudFormation template. Is that correct? Got it.
Yes.
So you could write in JavaScript or whatever languages they support, and it will compile that into a CloudFormation template. So you don't have to know CloudFormation. You can stick to the language you're most familiar with. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's really good because it handles the whole process, right? So in CloudFormation, the thing that you're deploying is a stack. And so everything ostensibly that's in that YAML file is a stack. And you have to, like I talked about how you have to figure out a way how to deploy this stack into your AWS account, right? Because everything in, when you're deploying these things, you're deploying into a region, right? Because everything is organized, the infrastructure. But with CDK, you're able to, trying to figure out how, like I kind of lost my place there. I'll edit that for a moment. So with CDK, it actually allows you to to do the whole deployment processes, and it manages it, and it actually kind of gives you like this really pretty output where it's like, it's saying, oh, it's actually kind of mirroring what you would see in the CloudFormation like dashboard, where it's saying, okay, we've requested to create these resources, so we're creating these resources, and then whenever it creates them, it updates the status in the text window to say that it's been created. And so like, maybe it's creating 50 or 100 objects, and this whole process is just kind of handled. So there's a lot of major advantages to using CloudFormation. One of the things I like to say is, if you're considering multi-cloud that are doing the term kind of more platform independent things, but I feel like if you're going to be seriously focused on AWS, it's really worth it to focus on the AWS tools, just because, in my vague opinion, now I don't have a lot of experience with a number of these other. So there's something called Sparkle Formation, which is something that is essentially a multi-platform, so GCP, Azure, that allows you to do this infrastructure as code creation across all of those platforms, right? I don't have a lot of experience I have experience with Terraform and CloudFormation and Ansible, but most of these other things I don't really have experience with, because even before, CDK was released in last summer, basically in the summer of 2019. And there have been a handful of other tools called like Vapor Shell, that's PowerShell based, and Former, which is also creates CloudFormation and Troposphere. And there's a bunch of these things out there. So I've had people that, longtime cloud infrastructure engineers be like, well, where does this thing fit in here? And mostly my recommendation is just go check it out, and because you can literally install the CDK CLI, start up a little like project, and then add like a VPC and deploy it, and you can kind of get a feeling for what it's like to do some CDK development. So one of the things I was kind of getting to was, so one of the advantages you have with CloudFormation over, say, Terraform, is that when you're doing like a deployment, and that deployment fails halfway through because there's some validation it couldn't figure out, there's like, Docker image you specified is just totally wrong, or it's out of date, or the service is down. That CloudFormation just automatically rolls back all of those infrastructure changes, and it puts you back at the place you were before you actually started that deployment. And based on my experience with Terraform, if you have a failed deployment, you then have to often trigger, I want to roll it back. It's not just kind of like an automatic process. And
it's a bit like doing surgery sometimes.
Yeah. And I definitely don't want to make this about me, like, bagging on Terraform or anything like that, because I think it's a fantastic tool. I really, really like it. I just think that like there are, when you have these super tightly integrated services, they just tend to like work a lot better if you're a Mac user, it just than if you're an iPhone user and a Windows user, it just kind of meshes better. So I've been talking forever, so I figured maybe you guys would have some questions about everything I've spouted out at this point. But
well, I like what you said about opinionated software, because I have opinions.
Yeah.
And sometimes the opinion is, I like opinionated software. And I kind of, a number of years ago, before I got into DevOps, probably about 15 years ago, I was getting into web development with Ruby on Rails. And then I moved into Cloud Foundry, and Cloud Foundry is essentially an opinionated cloud tool, right? Yes, it's agnostic to which cloud you put it on, but it has very strong opinions. And I have some other thoughts about where we could go with opinions, and that maybe Kubernetes doesn't have as many strong opinions. And I think that's one of its greatest weaknesses, is that it's like, do what you want.
Yeah.
But so coming back to what you're saying, it is intriguing to see what I could get done with it. But I think that the use case that came to mind for me was, I'm a startup, and AWS is de facto, and I have this tool, and it would help people who are still only running on maybe 5 to 10 to 50 servers, not have to learn Terraform, which has its own learning curve,
Yes.
or any of these type of infrastructure tools. And so, yeah, like you said, I could definitely see a need there for very small startups that are surgical. When you get to the larger scale, though, people are much more like, okay, we need something we can hire for, something that a lot of people get into, and we also want some flexibility. So that's why Kubernetes is and Terraform and you could throw out all of the technological buzzword bingo here, but yeah, some of those tend to get used for the big companies, but then they still want to standardize. Like the company I work at, Cengage, education company, we still want to standardize on things so that people can be cross capable in different areas, and that we're not stepping on each other's toes because we don't have all the cloud AWS, cloud CDK, AWS CDK experience. But yeah, it's definitely intriguing, and I think one of the things that you said in a previous episode is that you've actually put together a course. Is that correct?
Yeah. I just did like a little free course on this, mostly just because I enjoy doing it. I'm trying to like push myself to do more interesting things around these stuff. And I've actually, even when I was running a business with my wife, we created a lot of kind of educational products. Mostly it was her stuff, all food related. So this was my, I guess, second attempt to create like an info product just for myself. So I wrote a book on retargeting probably 5 or 6 years ago. But yeah, so this was a first screencast kind of, and it's because it's interesting. Udemy, like if you want to do a free course, it has to be less than an hour. So it's only like 30 minutes. It's really, really not that crazy, but it's meant to be just something like, hey, if you're curious about something, here's like a quick light intro to it. So
that's awesome. I remember when I was working at Chef, my first few years there, at least, Chef was not very opinionated. I was very much of we are going to give you the tools to do what you want. You can write whatever you want in Ruby. You can add it to those tools. Here's this big box of tools. Now go do DevOps. But we found a lot of customers were, almost begging us to have opinions. The nice thing about opinionated software is it often, at least at first, allows you to move faster because there's a proven path forward. On political campaigns, we've used as much baked in on the rails AWS as we possibly can because speed is absolutely critical, and we need to get small, simple things out there as quick as possible. But as you said, I can see when you get to a big enterprise, particularly something that has like a massive legacy application they need to move to the cloud, then you need a lot more customization, at least at first.
Early in my career, I figured out which jobs were worth working at and which ones weren't, mostly by trial and error. I created a system that I used to find jobs and later contracts as a freelancer. If you're looking for a job or trying to figure out where you should go next, then check out my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. The book walks you through figuring out what you want, vetting companies that meet your criteria, meeting that company's employees, and getting them to recommend you for a job. Don't settle for whoever has listed their job on the job board. Go out and proactively find the job you'll love. Buy the book at devchat.tv/jobbook. That's devchat.tv/jobbook.
Yeah, and the reality is this this deployment infrastructure as code deployment kit should be fairly flexible. I mean, the idea is that if you can deploy it in CloudFormation, you should be able to deploy it in CDK, and you should programming language, and it's wrapped in this beautiful kind of deployment process, and you can more easily kind of inject that into your CI/CD pipeline and everything. So I think it's like this is part of why when I started off talking about this, where I talked about the SDKs and then CloudFormation and now CDKs, because this is kind of like this third iteration of how you can, automate building infrastructure, which is, in my opinion, like the way to do it always, because it just is, I'm literally So for my own personal, I have some personal apps that are on Heroku, and I never built anything to automate stuff. And I'm trying to like upgrade an app from Python 2 to 3. And I was just trying to spin up like a new version, a new little test thing. And I mean, I still spent like an hour on it, and it's still not working yet because I need to get all the parameter, and the environment. It's just really easy. Like if you don't automate this stuff to then when you go need it, and if you just had it, like it would be up in no time. And so I think it's the way to do it. So
another use case came to mind for me, which was if you're just getting started in CloudFormation or these type of tools, it could be a good way to rapidly prototype and have it export to those. To a full CloudFormation, and but I could also see potential weakness where it's like if you really need to get into some complexities and some nuances for your network, does it become more of a hindrance if you actually become capable in like CloudFormation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there are when AWS releases like a new source, or they very recently. What was it? They very recently enabled the ability to attach EFS like network shares to a like an ECS, so like a container. Before, you could not attach this network attached storage to a container. It only allowed you to use the local storage in the container, so to speak, or so and so that is something. So when it's a new feature and it's not, maybe their software development teams are not like all in lockstep. So this, there's different people doing the CloudFormation software development. So it might take 3 to 6 months for that to catch up, for it to be available inside of CloudFormation. And so CDK is by like cloud support, right? And so it definitely has these hindrances, right? And so if you're working at the bleeding edge, it's going to have occasional places. But I know that AWS has spent a lot of effort in 2019 trying to catch up, and they finally surpassed. So believe it or not, in 2019, Terraform still had the lead on the number of resources that it supported. Like they literally supported more resources than CloudFormation did. But I know that they've really made an effort to kind of catch up to that. Especially when you have 160 something services or more, maybe even like 180 or something like. I don't know, who knows anymore. That's a lot of stuff to keep up on. So one of the things I'll just quickly define that I wanted to kind of define off the front was kind of explaining what actually infrastructure as code, at least my definition. Obviously I think this is a best practice for deploying modern infrastructure. And so, the idea is that obviously you have your software in, kind of revision control. You have it in Git or maybe Mercurial or something else, Team Foundation. And you do the same thing with this infrastructure as code stuff. It gets its own repository. You check it in. You still have software reviews and those types of things, and you still use your CI/CD pipelines to build, test, and deploy this infrastructure. Obviously, the varying levels of complexity that you could be here. Like, does the update to your software, like your application, is that the only thing that triggers your maybe like an infrastructure deployment, or are they? That's up to you on the implementation details. But I think ultimately this is about like making sure that you could rebuild all of this environment from code in a reasonable amount of time. Whether that's obviously that's very defined by the organization, but a few hours at most. I guess it matters how big. Do you have giant databases? Do you have other very complex, time constrained resources? So.
I remember, I think it was back in 2011, 2012, I was working at a startup, a cloud startup, and there was intense resistance on the part of a lot of the sysadmins to the idea of infrastructure as code. And I mean, there were a lot of reasons they gave for it, but when I dug into it, I found the biggest fear they had was all this very specialized knowledge that they constructed over years and years and years of how to hand configure a server, or what to look for when you saw a certain error was suddenly going to be useless. And what I've noticed over the past 8 years or so, that definitely isn't the case. That knowledge is still needed, but it's captured now when you use infrastructure as code. It's not living only in one person's head, which makes reduces the risk of your business quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I mean, there's something incredibly satisfying about oh well, I have this deployed in my test environment. Now we want to go to push this to production, and the process is just the same. We're just now maybe reconfiguring the pipeline or whatever, and it works. It just like you have this very strong reliability that it's going to work over and over again. And, I think that's just super, super important today in modern infrastructure. So, one of the things I was going to kind of point out was this idea in CDK, you have these constructs that are built around the CloudFormation classes. So in CloudFormation, the classes are something like AWS : the name of the service : maybe like a part of it. So in like CloudTrail, which is like the API log, like it logs everything that you will do in your AWS account. So it's like a security, governance mechanism. And so, that you can guarantee that there will be a construct in CDK that is like CFN CloudTrail, because the idea is that they're going to map all of those constructs into CDK so that you can go down and configure things at that level. So oftentimes there's these gaps on documentation, and the way you kind of close those documentation gaps is that you can then go over to the related CDK class, and you can literally look at individual aspects on there. Because a lot of times it's one of the things that's kind of weird about CloudFormation at times is there will be this required attribute that only has one value, but you still have to put that in, like logging true or something. I don't know. It's really has some little funny things in there that you only if you look in the documentation will you see these things. And sometimes you think it's going to be like a Boolean value. It's going to be like a true or false thing, but it's not. You actually have to go in there and it's some kind of static value. And so, these are just some kind of the super specific things of this tool, right? And I do think long-term, if you're going to be doing a lot of this infrastructure as code, you do need, if you're going to be using CDK, you do need more and more CloudFormation knowledge. But I think, it's not that challenging. I actually think it's a lot more difficult to learn the CloudFormation by hand, because you get into this situation where you start okay, well, how do these all connect? Because you're creating these individual pieces in there, right? And then but you have to associate logically, this is some logical thing. And it's I have to associate this subnet now with the VPC. So how do I do that? And sometimes there's these weird things that you don't even expect that are I'm trying to think of one of the examples. It's a lot of it is around this networking. I want to say when you go to attach a route to a route table, there's some kind of intermediate thing that you have to, and so there's just some weird stuff like that. But if you're doing something like CDK, a lot of that stuff's abstracted. And I think